This was initially a workshop presentation I prepared for an event for high school students, a workshop for young people in today's social world. Before we get into the meat of the presentation, I want your reflection juices flowing. So my first question would be, what are your feelings and thoughts about being alive in the world as a young person today? If you don't consider yourself a young person, you can still think of it in two aspects. What are your thoughts about being alive in the world today, whatever age you are now? Or you can compare it to when you were younger. You can pause right now and reflect on that, or you can do that later if you want. In order to do this presentation, I had to go back a little to when I was alive as a teenager. And the metaphor that I think would represent that time period of my life would be the bird in a bird cage. But just as a bird that's been born their whole life living in a bird cage wouldn't really know that there is anything out there other than the bird cage. So I felt that I was confined by my Asian background and the cultural expectations that came with it. But at the same time, I was conflicted by the Western lifestyle and expectations because I pretty much grew up in Canada my entire life. And I also thought that there was a normal life path that I had to follow, such as getting married, having children, getting a stable job, buying a house, etc. And that normal life path didn't happen. So it has me reflecting on these boundaries culture has placed on me and for other people as well. The aspect of my life that defied these boundaries was my relationship with landscapes. And so that was a very special relationship that carried on throughout my life, professionally and personally. When I see the social world of teenagers today, I see a lot of things going on, and I'm not sure if that's just teenagers or just what I see of the social world today. And here are some words that I've put down in this word tag map. A lot of social justice issues, mental health, climate change, a lot of cultural history, and a lot of things about our media, social media, the internet, because the internet and the use of cell phones was just, I guess I come from a generation that saw that transition between not being an everyday thing and then the transition into technology being the way we interact with the world most commonly. And from my perspective, this is quite chaotic, as illustrated in the screen. But at the same time, I would say it's not better or worse than my birdcage scenario, because in a way, it's as if the bird cages have broken apart and the pieces are still hanging around and people are not sure what to do with them. So that's why this presentation is about navigating the social world, the chaos. While chaos is something quite difficult to experience, I'd also say that chaos is the opportunity for renewal. Chaos happens when the chains of long-standing stagnancy breaks open. In nature, we see the storm as a similar metaphor to our social chaos. When we look at the storm, we can see that there are benefits to storms, even though they may be destructive. Storms are really beneficial to the cycles of nature. These are some things that I gathered from the internet about the benefits of storms, which includes maintains the Earth's electrical balance, cools the temperature of the air, replenishes the water table, removes pollution from the air and produces ozone, liberates nitrates in the soil, which will help fertilize vegetation, distributes seeds and pollen for carry on new growth, and removes old and weak vegetational growth. So it's a very important part of the cycle of life. So social chaos would also be in the similar parallel, very important to the cycle of our human life on a greater scale. But in order to go through this chaos, we need to build resilience, or else we're just kind of throwing ourselves into the chaos and flinging ourselves around with it. I say that gaining part of building resilience is about gaining clarity in order to discern your own truth. In this case, truth is not somebody else's truth or even a bigger truth. It's more of a personal truth. So how each of us considers why we exist, what we want out of life, and what we have control of and what we don't have control of. Note that discernment is different than judgment, because we're very accustomed to judging ourselves or people or circumstances, but this just adds fuel to the destructiveness of chaos. It's like throwing things into the whirlwind of a hurricane or a tornado. I like metaphors. So on the two sides, we see here that clarity is like bringing in a lantern into a dark forest or turning the light on a dark room. So when we have a lot of chaos, social chaos in particular, there needs to be personal clarity in order to navigate some of this more troublesome things that are surfacing. And then resilience is like having deep roots so that can anchor you to a very solid foundation rather than be flung around in the storm. This is important because, as Viktor Frankl, a psychotherapist and Holocaust survivor, also the author of Man's Search for Meaning, the book, which he talks about his experience of the Holocaust, he says, those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. When we discern our truth and have a reason why we do things and why we live, we can go through much of the chaos that's out there. But the other thing that's quite important from his insights, from his experience, is the idea of rethinking our relationship with life. Oftentimes, we come to expect something from life, or we expect that our lives will go in a certain way, or we expect other people's lives or society or whatever happens in life be a certain way. But maybe it's not the case. He says it did not really matter what we expected from life, but rather what life expected from us. So perhaps the why to live is not about what we expect from life, but rather what life expects from us and how we make the decisions to live life a certain way. One of the things that I see in society is those expectations or the challenge of discernment of what's able to be changed and what's not. So I think if there's one phrase of wisdom that is relevant to our lives collectively as a society, is this excerpt from the Serenity Prayer, which was commonly used in the work of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So often the case I notice in my own life and the way I deal with things, and also the way people in society often deal with things, is reverse these two aspects. The challenge that we have with not accepting the things that we cannot change, but also not having the courage or being afraid of changing the things we can, which is often the case, the things within our own power, particularly ourselves. In that case, that it's the wisdom that we're missing to know the difference. And that's where our discernment comes from. And this obviously wasn't something new. It's not something that's like a modern thing, even though we may think that we have a lot of social problems, world issues right now, because much of the wise thinkers or philosophers in the past had these advice for us already. In this case, from Rumi, the 13th century Persian poet and Sufi mystic, had said, yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I am changing myself. Focusing on yourself isn't about giving up on the world, even though we may sometimes think of that when we have to give up and when we're forced to give up on doing things for the external world. You're not giving up on the world because you and the world are interconnected and reciprocal. I am assuming that everyone knows what a hologram is in here. So if you've never seen a hologram and you're Canadian watching this, then you can check your passport or your money. In particular, in this case, the money on the corner of our dollar bills, we have some holograms on the side, and these holographic images moves with the light. So essentially, holograms are images produced from a light source onto a screen. That's as simple as it can get because I'm not a physicist, so I can't really explain anymore. You can search it up on the internet. And you can also watch this video about what happens when you cut a hologram in half. In quantum physics, there's a theory that the world is a big hologram. So that's called the holographic principle. And it describes the universe as a holographic phenomenon, which you could say simply is a three-dimensional projection of something that can be encoded into a surface area. That means that whatever we see in this 3D physical world here is all encoded from somewhere else. The special quality of the hologram that I want to bring to your attention is in this quote: every part of the hologram contains information about the whole scene like a smaller window. Each piece of the hologram captures a unique perspective of the whole scene. So if each part of the hologram, no matter how you cut it, has all the data of the bigger picture, then in the case of a holographic world, you and I also hold the entire data of the world within us. You hold the data of the world within you. So a change in you changes the data of the world as well. And obviously, we may not see that instantly or visible even to our human eye, but the data itself is changed. The motto I have for a flourishing commons is change the world by loving yourself. Make a difference by turning knowledge into wisdom. To explain this more, it's really about when you love yourself, you're bringing more love into the world as well. And a lot of our education is based on knowledge, which is a lot of accumulation of information. But wisdom is actually our embodied way. That it also includes our personal discernment of how we relate to the world, so that we have a particular kind of clarity to know what actions we can take and what actions are not within our responsibility, and it's actually for the better good if we don't do them. A lot of the issues behind our social justice, the upheavals of social justice issues in our world, particularly in North America, related to equity, inclusion, and diversity, is the idea of belonging. So there are aspects of belonging that are contradictory. For one, human beings want to belong as our most authentic selves. That means we're accepted for our differences, and we know that we are not alone in life. But human beings, at the same time, also have a primal fear of rejection. So it's not abnormal for social groups to encourage conformity among its members and see others, those outside of their social groups, as separate and threatening. And when I say social groups, it could be the particular groups of identity, whether that's race, political beliefs, families, whatever. It's just a group that is created together culturally as a psychological source of identity. But at the same time, regardless of whether we're in a social group or a social identity, we're also independent people, and we're all meant to be unique. We're not twins with anyone else. Well, you maybe have a twin, but you're still your own person. So when we feel bounded within our social group with this encouragement to conform, some of us may have difficulty in validating our right to be unique or our right to separate from this social group. And that may give us this tendency, some of us, to project enemies or at least project a separation onto others as a defense mechanism to validate this right to be unique or to be our own selves. Because of this fear of being rejected, we'll have to kind of protect ourselves. With these two aspects of our human nature, there is a paradox with the idea of human belonging. Because of that, to find true belonging, we have to transcend the social or transcend finding it through other people. A lot of people in contemporary society have turned to nature for belonging. That's why we have lots of discussion about the human nature connection or going back to connect to nature. But there's also a little conundrum here because humans are nature. While there's been discussions and lots of people trying to argue that we are nature, but obviously the argument derives from the fact that we don't necessarily treat ourselves as nature. So many people are getting into that discussion to reinforce the fact that we are nature. But I think we're at the stage in our ecological consciousness that many people have already accepted the fact that we are nature. It's not really much of a contention. So when we are connecting to nature, when we say human nature connection, and if we are nature, then when we turn to nature, what we are really wanting to do is connect to our own nature, to return to our own nature. Because a lot of our cultures, the commodity and hustle culture and survival, the way our societies are built, have steered away from the naturalness of the greater nature or even our own nature. There are some aspects of nature that we can really learn from as human beings. Here are some that I've listed here. One is life is a seasonal and cyclical process. we're very accustomed to, as mainstream society, to keep on going all the time, the busyness of life. So to learning that there is a cyclical aspect to this. Similarly, there is a need for complementary polarities, such as ebbs and flows, growth and decay, light and darkness. We often want to just pursue what we think is bright and happy and good and always growing and more rather than less. So these are things that we can learn too, is that there needs to be both sides, the yin and yang of life. And then back to the last slide about belonging, we inherently belong on the planet. And I think the other aspects of nature tell us that if you learn from them. But there are some environments that help us grow more than others. And in our social environments, there are cases where we are often given the impression that we don't belong on the planet. And it's really our task, if we're seeking belonging, is to understand that we inherently belong as nature intended us to be. Going along with this is that we are inherently unique and worthy. We're unique, but we also form communities. So there is a duality there as well. So lastly, I have here that we have material bodies. We aren't just minds walking around. There's a materiality to nature. And so that also teaches us, reminding us that we also have a full body that we are a part of. And the phrase, I think, therefore I am, from Rene Descartes, has really cemented a mind-body dualism, the aspect that our minds are separate from our bodies. And nature tells us that that's not the case. So grounding in our body stabilizes us with that resilience so that we can move forward into the world. The thing about our minds is it likes to create binary. So when we are talking about the human nature connection, just because of the way we work with language, we inevitably also create a human nature separation. So that's why I like to talk about landscapes, because there is a certain ambiguity to landscapes that help us transcend this binary about human and nature, or human created spaces and natural spaces, or non-human spaces. And also it transcends dimensions as well. We've got two-dimensional landscapes, as in photographs and landscape paintings, three-dimensional landscapes, as in our physical landscapes that we go into, and also the aspect of time is very important in landscapes as well. We also have inside and outside when we think of landscapes, that there's the lines, and also the way we experience landscapes really bring us into the aspects of our physical selves, our emotional selves, and also our mental parts of ourselves. When we refer to landscapes, we become participants. Either we are in the landscape or we are observing it. That's why I have a picture of the Zen courtyard here, because in the practice of Zen, there's this recognition that when we observe the landscapes, we are still participating in it. Or we can also be part of the landscape, raking the sand or picking up leaves, etc. So reflecting on our landscape experiences can bring us closer to the understanding of our human nature. This brings me to the main writing exercise that I had with this workshop. That is to recall a significant landscape experience from your past. I'd like you to recall an experience, think of a landscape experience from your past that you would consider significant, profound, or poignant. Most people would think of something physical or tangible, a landscape they experience through their bodies in the material form, or I think it's very valid to have a fictional landscape as well, from a movie, an image, or a book. Because for me, I've had some quite significant landscape experiences in that fictional realm. I'd like you to describe that memory as if you were revisiting the experience. So I also know that because this workshop was designed for younger people, they may not have that many landscape experience that they would consider profound in their life. So I've also suggested here that if you can't think of anything from the past, describe an ideal landscape that you'd like to experience. And I think that will still be able to help you get into the purpose of this exercise. So at this time, I'll let you pause the video and complete the exercise. Okay, welcome back. The second part of working with your landscape experience is to really feel it and embody it and get the lesson that it has for you. But to do that, I want to do a bit of contrast so that you can actually feel it more. This part one of an embodiment exercise is to have you recall a mildly irritating event that happened recently. Some examples that I have here is that you missed the bus, or you procrastinated before a deadline and you had to scramble your way, or you didn't do as well on a test as you'd like. You can choose whatever, but don't go into really triggering memories, because I'm not a therapist and that's not the point here. We just want to get you to kind of feel a little bit into your body, to see or to practice feeling how your body responds to a memory. These are just examples. May not necessarily be the case is that you may get tense shoulders, queasiness in the stomach area, but just pay attention when you're recalling your memory to see how your body feels in response. So now that you have a feeling about your irritating memory, you can go back to your landscape experience and recall that experience again, and do the same thing and pay attention to how your body feels in response to this memory, and then note the physical and emotional sensations. Now that you've done both the irritating embodiment exercise and the landscape embodiment exercise, you can hopefully get some sort of difference between the sensations. So think about where the difference is, whether that's physically in the body or if it reminds you of a certain feeling that's very prominent, and can jot these ideas down to see if it brings you any inspiration. Along with whatever comes up from reflecting on the differences, is also to see if your landscape memory triggers any ideas, thoughts, and realizations about anything. I have some big things here listed, like about nature, life, society, or the world, but just whatever that comes about, if your landscape memory has some meaning towards it. If so, note them down, because referring back to the quote earlier from Viktor Frankl, man search for meaning, human beings search for meaning, but we actually are makers of meaning. So if you have some thoughts about your landscape memory, you've made some meaning out of it. Write those down and then see if these ideas, thoughts, or realizations are helping you in the worldview you want of your life, or supporting you into something greater. And since this workshop is about hope and belonging, that's the theme, evaluate to see if the meaning you've created about your landscape memory is supporting that aspect of your life right now. If not, I suggest that you tweak these thoughts, meanings, like a story, like editing a story, so that you can work with different meanings with this landscape memory going forward. That's basically the simple workshop exercise that I have for you about our landscape experiences, but it's really a practice as well. So the next time you visit a pleasant landscape, such as walking in the park, going hiking, sitting in your backyard, or wherever, I invite you to check in with how you feel and whether there's some sort of pattern that comes out. And you can actually work with these memories and work with these feelings when you need it, because once you have this pathway of feeling pleasant emotions, or reference to some sort of feeling of belonging, if belonging is the thing you felt, or hope, or calmness, then you can always bring those back with your memories. I'm going to conclude with a few quotes here around belonging. This one I really like, from Brené Brown, who's a really popular self-help author, who's also a social scientist and also a professor. This particular quote comes from Braving the Wilderness, the Quest for True Belonging and the Courage to Stand Alone. She says, belonging doesn't require us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are. I also think there's some paradox here, not with what she says, but with belonging in itself, because courage to stand alone and to be who you are is that belonging really requires us to be alone as an individual. So when you truly belong as an individual, you belong to yourself. But I'd also say that you're not alone. You're never alone. You are yourself, not belonging to someone else, but you also belong to nature, to the land, to planet Earth, to the universe. So you're not alone when you truly belong. That brings us to another paradox of belonging, is that you are only free when you realize that you belong no place. you belong every place. No place at all. The price is high. The reward is high. And that's a quote from Maya Angelou. And I hope that you can carry this along with you, this belonging that you can find in landscapes, in nature, in your own nature or external nature throughout your life, throughout your experiences, because it's essentially an aspect of self-love, of feeling love from the universe, and bring that out so that you can change the world and turn knowledge into wisdom.